And we're live. Look at this. Welcome to the Heartland Post Live, Marquette Law School Poll Reaction. I'm Justin Phillips of the New Fashion Conservatives, and she's Megan Novak, the State Director for Americans for Prosperity. And Megan, the latest Marquette Law poll just dropped about 30 minutes ago, saying David Crowley is leading Tom Tiffany among likely voters 49 to 44, with 7% undecided. But among registered voters, it's a statistical tie with 44% each and 12% undecided. Margin of error on the poll was plus or minus 4. And the poll, interestingly for me, one of the first things I saw was it was done over 9 days. So, Megan, give me your initial reactions to this latest Marquette Law poll.
Wow is my first reaction. First of all, I'm so happy the technology is working, and then we were actually able to go live tonight, this afternoon. This is great news.
Mhm.
But looking at these numbers, just gut reaction, a couple things are standing out to me is, first of all, it's interesting to see Democrats performing better amongst likely voters than Republicans.
Mhm.
Historically, it's the opposite. And
Mhm.
so we got to look at what that enthusiasm gap is between Democrats and Republicans. 9 days is a really long time also to do a poll, which makes me question just some of the validity of polling in general, not saying anything about the Marquette poll or anything there, but like 9 days to get enough people to answer a poll is a really long time for people to change their minds, for new attack ads to hit. And so we got to make sure we're kind of looking at this with a little bit of a grain of salt as we really analyze the results of the people who answered on day one versus the people that answered on day nine had very different information about David
Mhm.
Crowley, because he is so unknown still. So that's kind of first gut reaction for me. What about you, Justin?
So I think I was expecting David Crowley to be leading that post-primary bump as the parties kind of consolidate and you have more general election voters beginning to pay attention. I think, David Crowley's name is in the news a lot more going into election day for the primary, and I think that's where he got this little bit of a bump. Is just kind of a name ID thing. But that barrage of fall advertising and campaign developments and attack ads will shape the race more. But I think initially, I think people haven't heard enough about David Crowley yet, and that was something that I think we can talk about as we're live reacting to this. I wanted to come on and be out there throwing cold water on this poll and telling Republicans not to panic, but I think the numbers itself do it, especially when you say it's tied among registered voters with 12% undecided. Just covering some history, early in the week we had a Heartland Post article that talked about in 2016, Marquette had Hillary Clinton leading by 10 and Russ Feingold leading Ron Johnson by 6. 3 months later, we know how that turns out. 2018, the big one was Leah Vukmir and Tammy Baldwin. There's only a 3 point separation in August. Baldwin would win by 11. In August of 2020, Biden was leading by 6 over Trump. He carries Wisconsin by less than a point. 2022, we have Barnes leading Johnson by 7 and Evers leading Michaels by 2. Obviously, those races close up, and Johnson erases that entire 7 point gap to win that race. So in 2024, August poll had Trump ahead by 1 point and Baldwin leading Hovde by 7. Trump's margin was right, but Baldwin's 7 point advantage was 1 point on election day. So again, we're talking about a snapshot, not necessarily a prediction, not necessarily what we think things are going to look like in November. But Megan, I think you said one thing that really stood out to you was that Crowley is pretty undefined at this point, and there's a lot of opportunity there. So I'll let you take that away.
Right. I mean, when you have a candidate who wasn't doing well in the primary, dropped out, and then got back in with just 2 weeks to go from the primary, doesn't have the money, doesn't have the infrastructure, it's really no surprise when you look and see 38% of people do not have an opinion of David Crowley. And that's really where I think the opportunity lies for the Tiffany
Mhm.
campaign, for groups like AFP who are out there door knocking and supporting Tom and opposing David Crowley, is we can go and talk directly to those swing voters who right now are breaking it in a very odd, if not unbelievable number, from the crosstabs here. Talk to them directly about what Crowley's record actually is, because he's going to go out there, just like we've seen every Democrat do in recent elections, where they run to the left during the primary. They come back and say, just kidding, I'm a moderate, I'm going to govern, I'm bipartisan. That's not Crowley's record. First of all, like you pointed out on the New Fashion Conservatives, was that earlier this week or last week? He's never run against a Republican.
That's right.
David
Hmm.
Crowley doesn't even know how to run against a Republican, let alone how to govern in a purple swing state. I mean, he's governing in Milwaukee where it's an overwhelming Democrat majority. And so we need to get out there, make sure we're talking to voters about the property tax hikes, the sales tax hike, the overall mismanagement, the deficits, the health insurance contract lapse, the pool closures, all of the, I mean, the moving sidewalk at Mitchell Airport, we all kind of make fun of it, but it is a
Hmm.
real pain in
Hmm.
the butt and a glimpse at what irresponsible leadership, lack of leadership looks like. And that's David Crowley's Milwaukee. So for anyone who's out there listening who might be feeling like they want to do a little dooming and glooming, I don't. First of all, don't do the doom and gloom because there's
Hmm.
nothing I'm seeing in this poll that's doom and gloom. All I see is opportunity. Opportunity to define Crowley and opportunity to get our base fully enthused behind Tom because there is still some movement there that we can have.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that especially with the way the Tiffany campaign is messaging David Crowley on data center David. I think it's sticking. It's going to stick around. It's going to be a main issue of this campaign. I know in this poll also showed that Tiffany was favorable. His favorable was 39%, unfavorable 42. I think just in general, as like being a Republican, I would expect the unfavorables to be slightly underwater for him. Like that's not much of a surprise. But knowing that there's 38% saying that they haven't heard enough about David Crowley, that shows there's a real opportunity to define him and that he hasn't been doing the work necessarily to get his message out there that shows what he is. And that gives Tom Tiffany that opportunity. And I think we talked about, I was expecting this to be a bit worse because national sentiment right now is just such that, Donald Trump, I think the last Marquette Law poll had him in the 30s or 40, like maybe 40% approval rating. So Tom Tiffany being above that is a good sign. There's also an enthusiasm gap that we should talk about for a sec. That more Republicans say they're enthusiastic about voting, with 55% than Democrats are 49% among registered voters. 66% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats are enthusiastic. So right now, even Republicans have that enthusiasm gap, and I think that shows that Hong voters haven't come home yet. Do you think that's kind of accurate? That only 2 out of 3 Dem voters are excited for Crowley, and Hong voters probably aren't totally on board with David yet. Maybe have some sore feelings after the way the primary shook out.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember 6 out of 10 Democrat primary voters did not vote for
Hmm.
David Crowley. He did not walk into this general election with an absolute mandate from Democrat primary voters. He squeaked by a victory that was frankly unexpected by I think most people, and feels like to the Hong supporters like the rug was pulled out from underneath them. I mean, they really thought they had that election in the bag until Crowley got back in, and even then, it was a surprise. And so when we look at that enthusiasm gap, you have to assume that's Hong voters continuing to drive the wedge between the left part of the Democrat Party and the very, very far left socialist wing of the Democrat Party, because I don't believe the moderate wing exists
Right.
anymore on the
Exactly.
Democrat
Exactly.
Party. So it's left versus very far left. But they're, and it's why you see Crowley just this week again saying like, there's no difference between me and the Democrat socialists. There's nothing I
Hmm.
would say on their platform that I disagree with. Those are all signs that he knows there's an enthusiasm gap with the Hong voters that he has to rectify. Because if he doesn't consolidate his base, he can't win in November.
Yeah, I think Republicans should see how this plays out. Independent voters even should see how this played out in Virginia and New Jersey last year during their elections. You had two people that were basically Trojan horse moderate Democrats. They were the problem solvers and willing to work across the aisle, and then immediately they come out and issue these. The far left comes right out. They full on Trojan horse. Virginia tried to redistrict their entire state based off of that one election. The governor there, her name is escaping me, but again, someone who pitched themselves as a moderate, and we're seeing that now with David Crowley. I think even you can go so far as saying that David Crowley is trying to run as a Republican light, and not sticking to trying to kind of have those both lanes where he goes out and says, "Well, I've cut taxes that one time." In Milwaukee County, even though the next year was the largest increase in like 20 years. And he comes back and then has to say that there's not a dime's worth of difference between me and Francesca Hong, and he has to do that to message to the Francesca Hong ones. Now, there was one thing in the poll. Did we forget to talk about this that really stood out to me? I actually think it's either an outlier, it's wrong. I think maybe even someone at Marquette Law fat thumbed this, that said that likely independent voters prefer Crowley 55 to 16 for Tiffany. I don't know what to make of that, because I don't know how you get to 44% tied or even down fives, whatever that is, points by being down with independent voters by 40. So,
Right. That one seems odd to me too. I mean, I would assume there's maybe a fat thumb. I mean, as the queen of fat thumb typos, no
mhm.
judgment to whoever's running that Twitter account. Um, because yeah, that just isn't. I would be really shocked if that held true, and would kind of question that sample of the swing universe. To be honest, I mean,
Mhm,
because when you look at too, the other thing we didn't talk about yet, Justin, is of uh, self-identified Democrats in the poll, Crowley is getting 98%, which
mhm,
means his only room is with swing voters. He doesn't have
mhm,
more Democrats to get, whereas Tom is looking at 91% of self-identified Republican voters, and so Tom has the opportunity, whereas Crowley doesn't, with both
mhm.
his Tiffany with his base voters and with swing voters. And I think that's the other opportunity on top of defining Crowley that I'm seeing coming out of this poll, that gives me a little bit of optimism, to be honest.
That's interesting. I would never have thought it like that. That's really good. One thing that stood out to me was the Republican Party being seen more favorably than the Democratic Party by registered voters, with 42% of people seeing the Republican Party as favorable, while 35% see the Democrat Party as favorable. Again, I'm going to guess that that has to do with Francesca Hong's voters being polled in this one, that they don't see the Democrat Party as that favorable. 85% of Republicans favor their party, again, while 74% of Democrats favor theirs. Again, I think that is Francesca Hong voters still being a little hurt that their candidate did not get through while leading in the polls. And if we're going to mention those polls, we can't forget that there was a whole fake poll that came out during the last week of the thing. That really stood out to me. Um, but again, you have a situation where Democrats haven't come home for David Crowley the way Republicans seem to be moving for Tom Tiffany.
Right. I just saw because Marquette Poll is still putting out results. So this is
Yes, yes.
true live reaction. Kind of top issue, if we want to talk about that. No surprise here. Inflation and cost of living is
Hmm.
overall top
Hmm.
issue with 43%. Then the second most is immigration and border security at 12.
Mm,
What a gap. And then it looks like Marquette's saying after that is four issues that are actually all cost of living related. It's health insurance, jobs in the economy, property taxes, and housing affordability. Um, and that just, I mean, if you kind of, I bet if they don't have the percentages out yet, but if you combine all those issues, clearly cost of living, affordability, opportunity economy, all of those kind of bucketed items have got to
mhm,
be over 50% of voters for a top issue. And when you just think historically, Republican candidates have historically had the trust on economic issues. I mean, they're the candidates who have historically been talking kitchen table, family budgets, all of those things. They have the trust on it. So when we think about that swing gap, between the swing gap that we're seeing right now and then where people's top issue is,
mhm.
I'm imagining a lot of those swing voters are going to break towards Tom, once
Yeah.
they start to. I mean, we have to remember this is also a poll that was done and put out in the last week of summer, real summer before back to school. People aren't paying attention yet; they're still in summer vacation and back to school mode,
Mhm.
and so they're not thinking about who's going to make my life easier come January. They're thinking, how am I getting my kids back to school? We're not doing the car line rant again, Justin. People are going to
I
get
was
sick
gonna.
and tired if we just do car lines every time we
Oh,
talk. But, they're focused on figuring out car line and school supplies. They're not focused on where the candidates actually stand on the issues yet. So
see,
that's something to watch in the next drop.
I was going to ask how yours was going, because I have a few parents that need to be resent the new drop off pattern, because they didn't do so hot with it when I dropped them off on day two. And now for my kids, it's day three. But part of that tweet that you just referenced, ranking lowest on the issues are data centers, abortion policy, public schools, and crime. So you think abortion policy and public schools, public schools has been a big thing on the Democrat messaging for a long time. And you got to wonder, like, Is that resonate? Does that resonate with voters? We're several years removed from the Dobbs decision, so is abortion policy really kind of trickling off? Again, you've seen both candidates message a lot about data centers, and it turns out that that's ranking kind of low. Really, just kind of some fascinating crosstabs there.
Right, that data center one, and we talked about it a little bit, Justin, after the primary night, kind of looking at where the data center issue was the hottest and how Francesca Hong performed, and that
Hmm.
didn't quite match up the moratorium message with where people seemingly were most opposed to data centers. So that's one that, I think it is something that is an entry point for voters because it's an easy to understand issue, but it may not be their top issue that's driving their vote. So the way I would
Hmm.
see it with how the messages are going is like, this is our way to get in front of voters where we open the door to the candidate, and then we'll win them over with cost of living message in the
Sure,
future,
sure.
is my guess. But
That's a
well,
fascinating
remains to be
angle. Yeah.
seen.
Yeah. Other stuff that's coming out recently says that, 20% said they're better off than a year ago, while 38% say they're worse. 69% expect inflation to get worse, while 43% of Republicans say that. 94% of Democrats say they expect inflation to get worse. I wonder if that's just a function of who's in charge right now, and if those numbers would probably flip if, it was a Democrat president and a Democrat, House and Senate, as opposed to, Republicans having control in DC.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats they are so lockstep on those issues and
Hmm.
their, I guess, hatred of the president. And I'm not shocked. I mean, that's 94% is pretty it's a pretty high number. And I mean, I
Hmm.
hope that's not true for the sake of our entire economy, to be honest. But that just goes
Yeah.
to show, I think that messaging on the left is so lockstep
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
independents and low propensity Republican voters are where we have to focus our energy as a conservative movement.
Yeah, clearly you said there's some gaps, there's some opportunities for the Tiffany side to make up some ground with maybe that, what, 9% of Republicans that aren't on board yet. And obviously we got to have to see if that independent number actually switches, or if again, was that a fat thumb somewhere, or was that actual, because then, clearly there's a lot of ground to be made up with independents.
Right. Another thing, Justin, I was just kind of looking
Hmm.
back through that we haven't talked about yet that I think is fascinating and just is probably more a function of the traditional media than anything is that the Democrats are actually seen. Sorry, I'm reading this live and trying to
Hmm.
react. So I'm going to actually rescind my previous comment. I'm actually surprised by this. I read it the wrong way at first. I'm actually surprised by this that now Democrats are seen as the more extreme party
Yes.
compared to Republicans.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I want to talk about that because I think we're seeing there is people realizing the DSA wing of the party, the socialism, communism wing of the party, with how well Francesca Hong did with almost beating David Crowley, has shown the normal general election voters that the Democrats are moving very far to the left, and that's now showing up in the poll.
Hmm.
Historically, it's always been people seeing the Republican Party as too extreme, which I would blame on the traditional media, which
Hmm.
was where I thought that was going. But that gap is that has flipped is really, really interesting to me, as well as the favorability of the party still stands with Republican Party is viewed more favorably than the Democrat Party.
Hmm. Yeah, what does it say? That 52% say the Democrat Party is too liberal, while only
Yeah.
26% say that's about right. And I think if you're saying the 26% saying it's about right are probably people who think that, it is moving farther to the left, and they like that. Whereas, 33% of Republicans say the party is about right, and 49% say the Republican Party is too conservative. Again, I think that 33% saying it's about right kind of aligns, quite frankly. Um,
Mhm.
so, uh, and this one, okay, the final one from this. Trump approval is tied for the lowest in either of Trump's first or second terms. His net approval is -19, the lowest on record for Trump. So we were talking about this at the beginning. I kind of look back to our last poll showing that Trump's approval rating right now is at 40%, disapproval at 59%, same level from July, while the disapproval is increased by a percentage point to 58 from 58%. Tom Tiffany is obviously running way above that. and is in much better position given the national climate, given the way that people feel about Donald Trump. And I have to think that, again, that's about his messaging, that's about the campaign he's running, and that he could, pull this off. And I think it helps that we don't have a Senate race on the ballot that can try and nationalize this election. It is really about Wisconsin issues and Wisconsin voters.
Right, and you have to think back in 24, where Tiffany overperformed Trump in his congressional district, which is
Hmm.
one of the highest voting if not the highest voting Trump district in Wisconsin, and Tiffany even overperformed that. And so, when we think about kind of that Trump approval number sitting at 40%, it clearly isn't dragging Tom down as much as you would probably guess it would, because I think
Hmm.
he has found that lane of being his own person, not nationalizing the race, focusing on Wisconsin issues as a Wisconsinite, and that's making a huge difference in how voters. I mean, we hear it from voters we're talking to out on the doors, where they're like, yeah, I don't like what the president is doing in Iran. I don't
Hmm.
like X, Y,
Yep.
and Z about Trump, but I'm open to considering Tiffany because
Hmm.
my property tax bill is through the roof. And
Exactly.
so they're
Yeah.
able to separate those two things and those issues in the race, which is a benefit to Tom, that's for sure.
Yeah, you think you look at the way that those things kind of line up, that David Crowley has 98% of Democrat support, and with Trump's 40% job approval, it's not like he has a big lane to win over people who don't approve of Trump but would vote, who do approve of Trump but vote for him. Like that's a non-existent group of people, quite frankly.
Hmm. Right. That
So
98% number for Democrats, but still that lower enthusiasm, you just got to wonder, like, if it's raining on election day, if there's construction, if they're just,
yeah.
I don't know, tired that day, like, are those people all going to show up and vote? Because I'm guessing they don't. They're not looking
Hmm.
too excited. They might say they're voting for Crowley now, but saying you're voting on a texting poll or a phone call is very different than actually making the effort to go to the polls come
Right.
November.
And especially if you're a Francesca Hong supporter from the primary, who is one of the, I guess, far left radical socialists who see David Crowley's messaging as being a Republican light. Do you really want that? I think Republicans tried to do this years ago in like 2006 and 2008. They were criticized for running as Democrat light. And look what happened. And then 2010 comes around. They messaged with that conservative, fiscal responsible message. Things go their way significantly. I wonder if the same could be said here, that David Crowley trying to, have it both ways and message in the general as a tax cutting, cost of living focused, again, Republican light, as opposed to the not a dime's worth of difference between him and his socialist message from the primary.
That's the benefit of alternative media, and you won't hear me say it often, but social media to an extent. I generally despise social media, but here
Hmm.
it's a case where I think these fake moderate Democrats are really going to get caught by voters because they have more access to alternative media, not just the traditional media. They have access to social media, where they're seeing the real life reactions and the real life comments instead of just
Hmm.
the nicely packaged news stories or the nicely packaged TV ads that are going to come out. And
Yeah.
social media has been around for a while, alternative media has been around for a while, but I think it's coming to a different point in how voters view the trustworthiness of those sources compared to the traditional media, and that is a tipping point that I'm kind of watching as this election goes forward.
Yeah. So one thing that was just released by the poll, I know we just talked about how folks said that data centers were low on their major issues. But the thing is, opposition to data centers right now, 78% now say the costs outweigh the benefits. Majorities of Republicans, independents, and Democrats say the cost outweigh the benefits. Really fascinating numbers there. Again, even if it's low on their issue, like you said, it's a way to get people to pay attention to the rest of the message, is saying that, David Crowley's data center David, and wants to put data centers anywhere in Wisconsin except in his backyard. I know we were just talking before we logged on about the fact that there's hundreds of acres in Milwaukee of industrial facilities or Northridge Mall that don't have data centers that could be used for him. He doesn't want to put them there, but he wants to put them in rural farmland and put the giant solar farms in there as well, just, which would plow under hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland in Wisconsin, because that means he doesn't have to worry about it. That means he's not responsible to those voters. He can have it somewhere else, and he can defend Milwaukee County while still getting, his data centers that he wants elsewhere.
Right. I mean, that's it. Does he not want the jobs? Does he not want the property tax implications? Because he just seems to prefer, instead of having development of any kind, regardless of data center or not, instead of having that, he'd rather just raise property taxes and raise your sales tax. And that's David, while not fixing a damn thing in the actual county. So if that's what you
Sounds
want
like
to vote for, I guess vote David Crowley. I
yeah.
mean, no
No
thank
economic
you for me.
high taxes, high property taxes, high sales taxes, and no economic development. So, Megan, even though Marquette poll looks like it still might be leaking out some numbers, I want to ask, what's your final thought on this poll? What's the one thing you took away from this, and want voters, especially on the conservative side, to be looking at when this with this poll completed?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is the opportunity we have to define Crowley. 38% unknown at the end of August. I mean, early voting is not that far away, so we've got to hit the ground running and making sure that we on the conservative side are the ones talking to voters first about David Crowley's true record and what he would do. High tax, no opportunity. I mean, that's David Crowley's record in Milwaukee. We don't want that statewide. And so when I'm looking at this poll, that undefined number is my key takeaway, and making sure we're all doing the work, regardless of where you're at in this state and what you can
Mhm.
contribute. Do something to get that message out so that we can define him as early as possible now, before early voting starts.
Yeah. No, of course, as I say that, as I'm trying to think we may end up wrapping things up, we're not. We're going to keep going because I got to read two more things to you, Megan, get your reaction. 58% of voters, now almost 6 in 10, say that it's more important to reduce property taxes than to increase funding for K-12 schools. Really kind of an odd um, number when you consider, again, the Francesca Honk David Crowley primary on who was going to fully fund schools and what that actually meant. Between 50 and 60% have said property taxes are more important in the last 11 Marquette Law polls. And then here's another one that's really interesting to me. Maybe it's why I've seen an uptick in enrollment at the Catholic schools in my area. 53% say they are very or somewhat satisfied with the job their local public school is doing. Satisfaction hit a high of 81% in 2013 and has consistently declined since then. So now you have almost 50% of voters, 1 in 2, say that they're only satisfied with their school, and another large percentage aren't. So again,
I mean,
fascinating numbers.
it's kind of that age old where, you would look at the approval numbers for Congress where it was like cockroaches were ranked higher in approval than Congress,
Hmm.
but then people kept electing their same
Hmm.
congressman. And it was like, yeah, I don't like that, but I like mine. And that was always kind of my perception of public people with public schools, is that they were concerned about, like, oh, the other schools aren't doing well, but my school is good because, my
Hmm.
kid's teacher lives next door, or, I went to the school, or whatever the case may be. But for almost 50% of voters now saying that they are not satisfied with their own public school, I mean, it's a reflection of, we're paying more than ever and we're getting less than ever. What was
Hmm.
the Heartland Post reporting a few weeks ago that 7 in 10 Wisconsin fourth graders can't read at grade level? I wouldn't be
Hmm.
satisfied either if that was. I mean, we chose a Lutheran school for my kids for that exact reason. We wanted to make sure that, we had a little bit more say in the curriculum and phonics and all of that for on the teaching side of things. But not every family has that opportunity in Wisconsin, and clearly this is an issue that needs to be talked about more, um, and how people are viewing their schools. I'm actually really dumbfounded by that number. I'm
Hmm.
really, really surprised.
Yeah, it reminds me, like you said, it's the congressional approval rating was like very low, but then I like my congressman, and I think for the most part in especially southeastern Wisconsin, we haven't seen some of those big blow ups like we have in Virginia school districts in the DC
Mm.
suburbs. I know there's folks up in, I want to say, the St. Croix area. She's fighting for a private bathroom space for women, which shouldn't be a big surprise. Like that shouldn't be a thing, but she has to fight for it because they're allowing boys in the women's restroom over those issues. But if that isn't hitting your area, you probably think, well, yeah, public schools are bad in certain areas, but mine's okay, and my teacher's okay. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And then to go on to that further, they did poll the school voucher program. 48% wanted it eliminated, 51% want to see it continued. That breaks along partisan lines, with 68% of Republicans favoring continuing the program, 68% of Democrats wanting it eliminated. Independents, it's about a 50-50 split, 49% continuation, 50% elimination. So unfortunately, I don't know if David Crowley's staked out a far left position on that one, but I certainly would be trying to see where he messaged on that one, again, opposed to Francesca Hong, who was like, we need to eliminate it on day one. And was it Crowley who had kind of that during the debate, said if you like your voucher school, you can keep it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, this is kind of funny. I was thinking the other night about back to the debate, as one does when they can't sleep, just thinking about previous Democrat primary debates. Party of one here. But I literally couldn't remember if David Crowley was in that debate or not because he was so forgettable. I had to go back and pull up the stream to see if he was in the debate. And I was like, and I'm someone who's, I mean, relatively plugged in. I follow politics pretty closely. I know what's going on here. It's kind of my livelihood. And I forgot about his debate performance. And so I was just like, I was thinking about that the other night, and I was like, man, I wonder if that same lackluster is once they agreed to some general election debates, if he keeps that kind of same milk toast,
Mhm.
middle of the road type answers and not inserting himself. Like I don't, he's going to be pretty forgettable. Um, so just a personal observation that even I forgot that David Crowley was actually at the debate.
Yeah, I know he was on that little step stool. I think he's a relatively short fella. But yeah,
Yes.
he didn't really stand out. He didn't really kind of jump in the way some of the other candidates did. And again, can you run as the boring candidate? It seems to work in Wisconsin that boring wins. And I guess they'll have to debate who can out boring each other now. So with that, I think it is time we are going to wrap up. If you want to keep talking about the Marquette Law Poll, you can listen to me on the New Fashion Conservatives. Megan and I are going to do our weekend show again this week, so we'll probably pick up the conversation from there. And of course, read everything that we're writing at the Heartland Post that we're going to break this down. So, my last thought on this one is, I'm not the doom and gloom that I had kind of prepared to be going into this, to try and, keep everyone's spirits up with a bad poll. But I think this one, there's a lot of good to take away from this, a lot of good in the messaging and the issues, showing that, Tom Tiffany is well within striking distance and well within the margin, not of necessarily of error, but the margins that Marquette had polled in previous August race. So, again, August is a snapshot, not a prediction. Wednesday's numbers today, they're telling us where the race begins, but not where it's ending. So, Megan, thank you for joining. Again, I'm Justin Phillips. You can check out everything we're writing at the Heartland Post, and Megan and I will begin to talk about this on Friday. So we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great rest of your day.